Tonight at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the National Football League will feature the best of the NFC and the AFC in the Super Bowl. It's the biggest game of the year. This will be the third Super Bowl for the city of Atlanta, but the first one for their new stadium, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. 96,000 hotel rooms have been reserved in Metro Atlanta, 11,800 of them within 1 mile radius of the stadium. 20,100 rooms have been contracted by the NFL alone. They're expecting 1 million people to be there, and most of them will not even be able to get into the stadium for the game. They just come for partying. It's estimated Airbnb hosts made over $3.7 million during the Super Bowl last year. That's just people that rent out their house, their apartment. They estimate 200,000 additional passengers have been arriving per day between February 1st and today. That's a 33% boost in passenger volume. 750 additional flights per day coming into Atlanta. 100 separate venues have been secured for Super Bowl-related events in Metro Atlanta. 7 miles of fencing have been installed around the Georgia World Congress Center campus just to keep it secure. The Atlanta City Council approved extending the closing time for bars during the Super Bowl week until 4 a.m. Which, if it takes you that long to get drunk, you're not trying. You know, I shouldn't have said that. That's really bad right there. That's bad right there. Sorry. But I mean, come on, takes whatever. I've never been drunk. Never even had my first beer. But I'm just saying. You can't do it by 4 a.m. You ought to try something else. Maybe you ought to try bowling or something. I don't know. The Super Bowl attendance record of all time is 103,985, set in 1980 at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, when the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Los Angeles Rams 31-19 in Super Bowl 14. The Super Bowl is the second most watched sporting event in the world. So what's in first place? Soccer. Or, as the Europeans say, real football. More than 100 million people worldwide watch the Super Bowl every year. In fact, Super Bowl 44 in 2010 unseated the most watched television program of all time, which was the finale of MASH. They had 106.5 million watchers. 103.4 million watched the Super Bowl last year. So we're talking about a big, big game. 32 teams have competed for the past 5 months just to get the chance to play in this game tonight. It's really a year-long pursuit with year-round conditioning, coaches working nonstop, franchises doing everything they can to gain an edge over other teams. I learned something this week I never knew before. Over 700,000 footballs are produced annually for official NFL use. 72 of them are used for the Super Bowl tonight. Now, up in New England, they don't have as much air in them as the other ones, but sorry. Caught me on a bad day. I don't know what to say. Collectively, all these teams have invested billions of dollars for players and coaches and stadiums and practice facilities and equipment, all just to get to this one game. It's so important. A 30-second commercial this year will cost $5.24 million. Just one 30-second commercial. Which means when you're watching the commercials tonight, before you've watched a minute and a half of commercials, they will have already spent more money on advertising than our church's entire operating budget for a year. Now, back at the beginning, January 15, 1967, Commissioner Pete Rozelle worried the NFL was charging too much for the first Super Bowl. That game, which was called the AFL-NFL Championship, was played in a stadium with 31,000 empty seats at the LA Coliseum. Tickets to the first Super Bowl, you could get them for $6, that was the cheap seats, or $10, a little bit nicer, or the best seats in the house, $12. Parking alone tonight will cost over $300. The average cost of a ticket, in case you're thinking about going next year, the average cost for the past 5 Super Bowls for one ticket is $5,145. 8 million pounds of guacamole will be consumed today. Not by me. 14,500 tons of chips will be eaten along with it. Add to that 1.38 billion chicken wings and an estimated 325.5 million gallons of beer for people who have to take till 4 a.m. to get drunk. I'm going to let that go. Tonight's the 53rd year they've had this big game, and it's huge. The economic impact alone of the Atlanta metro area is estimated to be over $400 million. But as big as the Super Bowl is, it's not the greatest game of all. The Super Bowl is a big game, and it's a big deal, but it's not the biggest deal. My dear friend and mentor, Wayne Smith, back in 1983, started a tradition of preaching a sermon every Super Bowl Sunday called Playing Hurt. Wayne said, and I quote, "To every person who's ever played the game, the greatest thrill, the greatest dream, the greatest goal of a football player is to play in the Super Bowl and then to wear the ring of a Super Bowl champion. In spite of their unbelievable conditioning, nearly all these players play hurt. The question begs to be asked, why do these fellas do this? Some do it because of the money, but for most of them, it's just in their blood, and they love it. They interviewed a former player on television who's now in a wheelchair. He played 383 games, had 40 surgeries, 30 on his knees, 3 on his back. He played with 5 rods in his back. Wayne said no one retires from the NFL in one piece. The reporter asked him, would you do it over again? Absolutely, he replied without hesitation. One newspaper said this about the Super Bowl: athletes are willing to sacrifice body parts, pills, and needles, biting their lips, and throbbing pain becomes unbearable. Their job is to play regardless. The bottom line is you play hurt or you don't play. Tommy Bell was an NFL referee for 15 years. He was an attorney who was also a member of the church where Wayne Smith was pastor in Lexington, Kentucky, Southland Christian Church. He's dead now, but before he died, he used to love to tell the story about a Super Bowl game where the Kansas City Chiefs were playing, and Tommy was one of the referees. Fred Urbanus, a tight end, hit another fella head on, and one of his eyes fell out. True story. Well, not until that moment did millions of people watching on television know that Urbanus had an artificial eye. Well, there wasn't any problem finding it on the artificial turf. Somebody rinsed it off, dried it for him, and he put it back in. Tommy Bell, who was a short man, walked over and said, Fred, I don't believe this. I mean, you've got one eye. Your livelihood, your security, your profession, your family, your future, everything depends on your eyesight. And you've already lost one of your eyes. What in the world would you do if you lost your other eye? And Fred Urbanus said, I'd become an official like you, Mr. Bell. The truth of the matter is this: whether you're on the football field or you're in the kitchen or you're in the office, you're going to be hurt. You're going to be hurt. Every one of us has hurt in our lives. We've either had problems, we're either having them now, or we're going to be having them. The Bible tells us that suffering is inescapable. It's inevitable. Job 14:1 says, man born of woman is few of days and full of trouble. Jesus said in John 16:33, in this world you will have trouble. All of us have this in common. We all have hurts and heartaches. And the only way to avoid trouble is to die. That's not a very good alternative. Have you ever been discouraged, misunderstood, feelings got hurt, offended? Have you ever been ignored or overlooked? Someone took advantage of you? Have you ever had to deal with an illness? Maybe you had to care for a loved one who was dying? Have you ever been lonely, tired, ready to just call it quits on everything? Maybe your children didn't turn out the way you hoped they would. Or you wish you had a different set of parents or siblings. Maybe your marriage hasn't turned out to be what you'd hoped it to be. Instead of better, it's worse. Instead of health, it's sickness. Instead of richer, it's poor. What does the Bible say? It says stay in the game. Luke chapter 9, verse 62. No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Matthew 10:22, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Now the question is, will you stay in the game? No matter what happens, are you going to stay in the game? Someone said God had one son without sin, but no son without sorrow. And so we come to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Would you stand for the reading of God's Word this morning? 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning in verse 8. I'm just going to read a couple of verses, and then we're going to jump down to the end of the chapter. Paul says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Jump down to verse 16. He says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. You may be seated, and may God add His blessing to the reading of His Word. Now you may say, well, Pastor, what was Paul saying in those verses? He was saying, I'm down, but I'm not out. I'm still in the game. I'm still in the game. In Romans 8, he lists some of the things that could take us out of the game. Trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, sword. But he also shares in verse 28 of that chapter, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to His purpose. He says in verse 31, if God is for us, who can be against us? The question this morning is, are you going to stay in the game? Now, I'll tell you this, if you're going to stay in the game, there's some things you've got to learn. First of all, we have to learn how to play when we're hurt physically. We have to learn to play when we're hurt physically. Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and in chapter 12, he said, 5 times I received 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was stoned with rocks. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day on the open sea. I've constantly faced danger from bandits, from my own countrymen, the Gentiles, from false brothers. I've labored and toiled without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst. I've gone without food. I've been cold and naked. I was even given a thorn in my flesh to keep me from becoming conceited, so I would take pleasure in my weaknesses. If you can't play hurt, you can't play. That's just part of it. The Dallas Cowboys won't be in the Super Bowl again this year. However, some of the Dallas Cowboys over the years have exemplified what it means to play hurt. Bob Lilly said this about former Cowboy quarterback Don Meredith. He was really tough. He got beat up so bad in his early years. His last game up in Cleveland, he came out of the hospital to play with a broken rib, a punctured lung, and pneumonia. I saw Meredith's nose broken so bad it spread all over his face. He looked like a raccoon. But he played, and they won. In a playoff game in 1970, former Cowboy Walt Garrison broke 3 ribs in the first quarter and continued playing after he had been carried off the field. He rushed for over 100 yards, caught several passes, and helped the Cowboys continue their path to the Super Bowl. Emmitt Smith redefined toughness on national television in the last game of the season in 1993. With the Cowboys and Giants fighting for the NFC East and home field advantage throughout the playoffs, Emmitt played the entire game with a sprained and separated shoulder. He carried the ball a record 42 times, 32 carries, 10 receptions. He produced 229 of the 339 yards the Dallas offense had that day. Nate Newton said Emmitt told him in the huddle to block for him and then to run behind him so someone could pick him up and the other team wouldn't know how hurt he was. The Cowboys won that game 16-13. They went on to win the Super Bowl. Don't tell me it doesn't matter whether or not you learn to play when you're hurt. It matters. Well, I can never do something like that. Well, listen, if you don't learn to play when you're hurt physically, you never will do something like that. Paul said, that's why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, for when I'm weak, then I'm strong. 2 Corinthians 12:10. He said, I actually take pleasure in playing hurt. Friend, listen, if you're going to stay in the game, you're going to have to learn how to play when you're hurt physically. Number two, if you're going to stay in the game, we have to learn how to play when we're hurt emotionally. Do you ever think the Lord hurt emotionally? You ever stop to consider, did he ever have disappointments like we do? Did he ever have some circumstances that just broke his heart? I think one of those is found in John chapter 6. Jesus had just fed thousands of people, and the next day he was teaching them what it was going to cost to be a follower of his, what it was going to cost to be a disciple of his. And verse 66 says the entire crowd walked away. Now, I've had a few people walk out of here a few times over the years, and I always say, thank you very much. Don't let the door hit you on the backside on the way out. So, Pastor, that's so uncompassionate. No, listen, if someone doesn't want to stay in the game, they need to leave. That's what's wrong with our country today. We've gotten to the place where we no longer stand up for what's right. We just go along to get along, and the whole country is going down the toilet. Oh, Pastor, you're getting too fired up. No, listen. I'm not too fired up, and I won't be too fired up, and you need to get fired up. Every Christian needs to get fired up. I see stuff in the news, people ask me all the time, well, how come you don't comment about that on Facebook? Or how come you don't say something on Twitter? Or how come you... Listen, if all I did was comment on all the garbage going on in our world, I couldn't even preach the Bible. I might be standing up to 4 a.m. trying... No, never mind. I'm not... Sorry. The whole crowd walked away. You know what Jesus did? He turned to his own disciples. He said, are you guys going to leave too? You know, Peter, who's always the one that he's famous for doing what's wrong, he got it right here. He said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words of life. Listen, you got to stay in the game. You got to learn how to play when you're hurt emotionally. If you can't do that, you'll never be able to play. You'll never make it. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down. It's based on a true story. There's a vehicle filled with wounded American soldiers that lurches to a stop in the middle of a street where Somali bullets are flying in every direction, and the officer in charge tells a soldier to get in and start driving. And the soldier says, I can't, I'm shot. And the officer responded with this immortal line, we're all shot, get in and drive. Stay in the game. I've heard Wayne Smith tell the story about Jerry and Judy York. Jerry was the pastor of a church in Pennsylvania. Back in the summer of 1974, they decided to take their family to the county fair, and one of the attractions at the fair was the race cars. And the Yorks were leaving a horse barn on the grounds when a race car crashed through the wall and struck their two little girls, one 8, one 10. One died at the scene, the other died a few days later. They continued to serve in ministry, and Jerry eventually took a job as a pastor at a church in Youngstown, Ohio. Were they playing hurt? Absolutely. But they stayed in the game, even when it hurt. John Ortberg wrote a book called The Me I Want to Be. He said, and I quote, maybe you've been attending church for years out of a sense of obligation. You show up week after week out of habit or because someone expects you to, but it is actually increasing the distance between you and God. So here's an idea. Stop going to church. Wait until you want to go again. Find out why you want to go. Trust that if you truly seek, God will bring the desire back to you. End quote. Wait until you want to go again? Try telling that to Jerry and Judy York. Try telling that to the woman who just lost her husband. Try telling that to the husband who just lost his wife. Try telling that to the person who just lost their job. No, you don't stop going to church. You show up every time the doors are open and you say, God, I'm not quitting. I'm staying in the game. I'm staying at my post. I'm playing hurt, but I'm playing. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, listen, if we only did what we feel like doing, no one would go to work on Monday. Am I right? I mean, if we only did what we feel like doing, no one would ever eat a salad again. Can I get a witness? No one would ever pay their taxes. No one would ever stop at a stoplight. You can't live like that. In 1993, during the game I mentioned earlier, when Emmitt Smith broke his shoulder, Cowboys coach Jimmy Johnson sent Lincoln Coleman in to take Emmitt's place. Lincoln Coleman said, Coach Johnson told me to get in there, but when I ran out on the field, Emmitt told me to get out of there. He wasn't coming out of the game. That's the way every Christian ought to live their life. I'm not coming out of the game. The Bible says in Galatians 6:9, let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. Stay in the game. Learn to play when you're hurt. There's one more thing. If you're going to stay in the game, love is what will keep you in the game. Love is what keeps us in the game. Love for the game is what kept people like Emmitt Smith and Don Meredith in the game. And love for God is what keeps us in the greatest game of all. Jesus said in Mark 12:30, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. How much love do you have for the Lord? That'll determine whether you stay in the game or not. You see, love for the Lord is the game changers. It separates the players from those who are content to just sit on the sidelines or not even come to the stadium. Now, I'll be honest with you, there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to quit. The devil will make sure of that. And there'll be plenty of quitters who'll say, come and join us and quit with us. I like what Wayne Smith said. He told me one time, he said, Barry, he said, there's never been a statue anywhere in the world erected to a critic or a quitter. He said, you know why? I said, no, sir, why? He said, because nobody wants to go and admire somebody who was always tearing stuff down. And he said, nobody wants to go and see somebody who the thing they're famous for is they quit. He said, but you can travel the world over. And he said, you'll find statues everywhere to people who stayed in the game and didn't quit. So there are memorials everywhere. They're all over the world where people come and they admire the fact that they stayed at their post. They stayed in the game and they made a difference. Several years ago, U.S. News and World Report told about a little girl, 7 or 8 years of age, who somehow pulled her 180-pound father out of a swimming pool and saved his life. When they asked her, how'd you do that? She said, it was easy. I love my daddy. Your love for the Lord will keep you in the game. When you love, you'll do things that others won't do. You'll do things that you didn't even know you could do. You'll stay in the game even when those around you quit. And I'll tell you this, when a church has that kind of love for the Lord and love for each other, the potential is indescribable. 1 Peter 4:12 says, dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering as though something strange were happening to you. If you're in the game, chances are you're going to get hurt from time to time. It's just part of it. The question is, are you going to stay in the game? Will you cross the finish line? In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, Paul said, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. One day you and I can say that too. But only if we stay in the game. And we play, even when we're hurt. Let's pray.